Once upon a time, in a land where snowflakes fell like feathers, lived a beautiful princess. The land was blanketed in a pristine layer of snow, making it look like a scene from a fairy tale. The castle stood tall and majestic, its towers piercing the sky, surrounded by a forest that seemed to sparkle with magic. The snowflakes danced in the air, creating a serene and enchanting atmosphere. Her name was Snow White. Her skin was as white as snow, her lips as red as roses, and her hair as black as ebony. She was the epitome of beauty, with a kind heart and a gentle soul. Snow White's beauty was not just skin deep, it radiated from within, making her beloved by all who knew her. Snow White lived with her stepmother, the queen. The queen was very beautiful, but she was also very vain. She was obsessed with her own beauty and would go to great lengths to ensure that she remained the fairest in the land. Despite her beauty, the queen's heart was cold and filled with jealousy. She had a magic mirror, and every day she would ask it, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror was no ordinary mirror. It was enchanted and could speak the truth. The queen relied on the mirror to reassure her of her beauty, and it never failed to do so. One day, the mirror answered, "My queen, you are beautiful. It is true." The queen's face lit up with a pleased expression as she basked in the glow of the mirror's words. She felt a sense of pride and satisfaction, knowing that she was the fairest in the land. "But Snow White is fairer than you." The queen was furious. Her face twisted in anger and her eyes burned with jealousy. How could anyone be fairer than her? The thought consumed her, and she could not bear the idea of being second to anyone, especially not to her stepdaughter. How could anyone be fairer than her? The queen's rage knew no bounds. She stormed through the castle, her mind racing with thoughts of how to reclaim her title as the fairest in the land. She could not accept that Snow White's beauty surpassed her own, and she vowed to do whatever it took to change that. The queen's jealousy and vanity would set in motion a series of events that would change Snow White's life forever. The queen stormed around her chamber, her face red with anger. Her luxurious surroundings did little to calm her fury. The opulent tapestries and golden chandeliers seemed to mock her distress. She couldn't believe that her own stepdaughter, Snow White, was now considered the fairest in the land. The thought gnawed at her, filling her with a bitter jealousy that she could not shake off. She paced back and forth in front of her magic mirror, her brow furrowed in thought. The mirror had always been her confidant, her source of truth, but now it seemed to betray her with its brutal honesty. The mirror, as always, reflected her image back to her, but now it seemed to mock her with its honesty. The queen's reflection showed not just her beauty, but the anger and envy that twisted her features. The queen pointed a shaky finger at the mirror, her voice trembling with rage. "How can this be?" she demanded, her voice echoing in the grand chamber. "How can Snow White be the fairest?" "Snow White must be out of the way," she declared, her voice growing more determined. "I will be the fairest." Her eyes blazed with a fierce resolve, and she knew what she had to do. The queen decided to get rid of Snow White. She could not allow her stepdaughter to overshadow her. The plan began to form in her mind, a dark and twisted scheme that would ensure her place as the fairest in the land. She called for her huntsman, her most trusted servant. He would carry out her orders without question. "Huntsman," she commanded, "take Snow White into the forest and make sure she never returns." The huntsman bowed, understanding the gravity of his task. The queen watched him leave, a cruel smile playing on her lips. Her plan was in motion, and soon she would be the fairest once more. The huntsman was a big, strong man, but he had a kind heart. He liked Snow White. The queen gave him a wicked smile. "Huntsman," she said, "take Snow White into the forest. Kill her and bring me her heart as proof." The huntsman was horrified. He couldn't imagine hurting Snow White. He took Snow White into the forest, but he couldn't bring himself to hurt her. "Please," begged the huntsman, "run away, princess, and never come back. The queen is wicked." Snow White was terrified. She didn't know what to do. She ran as fast as she could, deeper and deeper into the forest. The trees were tall and dark. Strange noises filled the air. Snow White was scared, but she kept running. Soon she came to a clearing. In the middle of the clearing was a tiny cottage. Smoke was coming from the chimney, and it smelled like something delicious was cooking. Snow White cautiously approached the cottage. She knocked timidly on the door, her heart pounding in her chest. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a cozy little room. But there was no one there. Snow White cautiously stepped inside. The cottage was messy. There were dishes piled everywhere and tiny clothes were strewn about. Snow White giggled. This must be the home of children. Suddenly, Snow White heard voices coming from outside. A group of 7 dwarfs were marching home from work, singing a merry tune. The dwarfs were surprised to find Snow White in their home. Snow White told them her story, and the dwarfs felt sorry for her. "You can stay with us," said Doc, the leader of the dwarfs. "But you must be careful. The queen is wicked, and she will try to find you." In a land where magic and mystery intertwined, there existed a tale of envy and deception. The queen, consumed by her vanity, looked into her magic mirror every day, seeking reassurance of her beauty. "Mirror, mirror on the wall," she sneered, "who is the fairest of them all?" Her voice dripped with arrogance and expectation. "You are beautiful, my queen," the mirror replied, "but Snow White is still the fairest of them all." The queen's face twisted with rage and jealousy. "She lives in the woods with 7 dwarfs," the mirror continued. The queen was furious. How could a mere girl surpass her in beauty? She decided to trick Snow White herself. Her mind raced with wicked plans, each more sinister than the last. She disguised herself as an old peddler woman and went to the dwarf's cottage. Her heart pounded with anticipation. "Hello, my dear," said the queen in a croaky voice, masking her true intentions with a kind expression. "I have a magic apple for sale," she said, her eyes gleaming with malice. "It will grant you your heart's desire." The apple glowed with an enchanting light, promising wonders untold. Snow White, innocent and trusting, reached out for the apple, unaware of the dark magic it held within. As Snow White took the apple, the queen's sly smile widened. She knew that with one bite, Snow White would fall into an eternal sleep. Snow White bit into the apple, and immediately her eyes fluttered shut. She fell to the ground, the apple rolling from her hand. The queen watched from a distance, her heart swelling with triumph. At last, she thought, "I am the fairest of them all." But the dwarfs soon found Snow White, their hearts breaking at the sight of her lifeless body. They placed her in a glass coffin, hoping for a miracle. And a miracle did come, in the form of a prince who had heard tales of Snow White's beauty and kindness. He arrived at the cottage, his heart filled with love. The prince kissed Snow White, and as his lips touched hers, she awoke from her enchanted sleep. The spell was broken, and Snow White was alive once more. Snow White and the prince were united, and the dwarfs rejoiced. The queen's wicked plan had failed, and love had triumphed over envy and deceit. Snow White was hesitant, but the apple looked so delicious. She took a bite and immediately fell into a deep sleep. The queen laughed wickedly. "Now I am the fairest in the land," she cried. The dwarfs came home and found Snow White. They were heartbroken. They didn't know what to do. They placed her in a glass coffin so they could always look upon her beauty. One day, a handsome prince came riding through the forest. He saw Snow White lying in the coffin and was immediately captivated by her beauty. He leaned down and kissed her gently. Suddenly, Snow White's eyes fluttered open. The queen's spell was broken. Snow White was so happy to see the prince. She had been so lonely. She knew in her heart that the prince was her true love. The prince and Snow White were married. The dwarfs were thrilled for Snow White and danced at their wedding. As for the wicked queen, she was never seen again. Some say she wandered the forest for the rest of her days, her beauty fading with each passing year. Snow White learned that true beauty comes from within. She also learned the importance of kindness and friendship, and she lived happily ever after with her prince. And so, little ones, remember that even in the darkest of times, kindness and love can prevail. Now close your eyes, dream sweet dreams, and I'll be back tomorrow with another magical story. Good night.